Welcome to Worldview Wellness Podcast number 4.
That's right. Health Matters, episode 4.
Health Matters.
Today we're going to be talking about supplements. I'm Ty.
And I'm Micah.
I think we're just going to dive in. There are so many supplements to choose from. You can get them from anywhere. Grocery store, health food store, online.
No shortage of supplements.
No shortage of supplements. I want to talk about not only the company that we've partnered with in Canada called Fullscripts. They have pharmaceutical grade supplements. They have hundreds of brands to choose from. You like to recommend supplements that you've seen work in your clinical practice.
True.
All of the supplements that we use through Fullscripts are non-GMO'd, vegan. They don't have bad fillers. They are what they say they are for the most part.
Yeah, and I think that's really, if we were going to do a commercial for Fullscript, then that's probably what I would kind of, my outline would be, what you're getting. We had some people point out, when we were first doing our business, that some of the things that we were recommending through online sources like Amazon have, there's been considerable issues on, the big online retailers like Amazon with products that were counterfeited in from China, and that, maybe didn't have all of the things in the right doses that they were supposed to have in there because of that, and even the concern about, toxins and heavy metals and all that kind of things, or those types of things being in the supplement. So, the integrity of the actual brands that are available through Fullscript, they ensure that you're not getting any knockoff products. And then also, like you said earlier, the fact that there's non-GMO products. I'm able to go through there and look on a site that has a bunch of really, really good products that are backed up by recommendations from doctors across the spectrum, that they actually have what they're supposed to have in them, and then the absence of the potentially damaging fillers and binders and preservatives and genetically modified ingredients and just all of those things. So it's getting quality supplements is important. I would wager to say that the vast majority of people out there taking supplements are probably not taking quality supplements. They might read something about vitamin D being good, or a B vitamin or complex being good, or whatever the supplement, and so they just go out and go to Walmart or the pharmacy and just pick the first thing that says vitamin D in it, and they have no comprehension of all of the ways that you can screw vitamin D up. Like, where are you going to source it from? Are you going to source vitamin D from GMO wheat or from a GMO source? Is it vitamin A, or is it retinol palmitate? Those two are not the same. So, a lot of the details of supplementation, it's just almost impossible for the layperson to be informed enough to make those decisions, which is a great reason why we paired up with Fullscript.
Which I love working with Fullscripts because it makes things so streamlined. For instance, this is kind of how we use it. But what I'd like to say about that first is that you don't have to be a client of ours to create an account under Worldview Wellness and to be able to order fantastic supplements, and you would get 15% across the board off.
Well, there's, one of the cool things about supplements is that unless you're just going bonkers,
and we've seen that before,
in a relatively uninformed manner, most supplements, when taken responsibly, are, fairly safe, unlike pharmaceuticals. If you look at the technical definition of any pharmaceutical that requires a prescription, they're actually classified legally as dangerous drugs, which is why you have to have a prescriber prescribe those pharmaceuticals for you. Mm-hmm. Now, I would take that a step further and say that even a lot of the over-the-counter drugs, aspirin, Tylenol, ibuprofen,
right.
Those are also dangerous drugs. I can't, there's probably been hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that have gone to the hospitals with, for Tylenol overdose, or, for some type of other, over the counter pharmaceutical overdose. That's not uncommon. So, pharmaceuticals in general are, in my opinion at least, and probably that of a lot of naturopathic, or holistic or integrative, functionally minded medical providers or consultants, the supplements are infinitely safer than pharmaceuticals.
Right. That is very, very true. And the thing that I have seen since we started this business and we use supplements is that there are many docs out there who call using supplements like woo woo. It's like hoodoo voodoo.
Right.
And they tell their clients they won't affect their health, that it will not help them, that it won't change anything.
Right.
And that is not my experience. So many of our clients, when I would see that they stuck to the recommended dosages, the recommended supplements stuck to the plan, the lifestyle changes, some of the therapies that we suggested outside of the supplements, they would thrive, absolutely thrive. And so my experience has been that you can use supplements to completely change your terrain. Now, having said that, we don't advise that people use supplements in the place of food. We always want them to try to
Right.
get their nutrition through food first, and then use the supplements as a way to come in on the backside and really hold up the terrain.
The clue there is in the name, supplements. That would at least infer that it's supplemental to something. And so, I always try to make a point to talk to our clients about the fact that, hey, look, yes, you're on 10 or, and maybe in some cases even up to 20 supplements for very specific reasons, but those supplements are supplemental to the lifestyle that we've encouraged our clients to, to engage in. So, the foundation of what we do is to, encourage people to eat right, encourage people to eat a God food and not man food diet, to understand what that means. There's a lot of nuance there. It's not black and white. There's more gray than anything. So, really trying to give them an education and a mind shift of what that lifestyle is, regarding the diet, also making sure that our clients are active and that they're using their bodies in a way that's going to adjust the function of the different systems of their body, typically through hormone and cell signaling and all of the changes that happen whenever we're active and working out or just being outside in nature, those types of things. Managing stress levels. I would say that if you've got 20 really targeted supplements on one hand, and on the other hand you have, as close as you could get to a perfect diet and having that peace, low stress levels and a peaceful existence, being outside in nature, getting sun exposure, being active, all of those things. If that is what I have on one hand and I have the 20 supplements in the other hand, then I'm going to go for the lifestyle changes every single time, because that's really where you get the benefit. The supplements are there and they can be, very, very useful. But I think that really the important part is, where on that priority list do you see the supplements? And so in America these days, the typical American, when they go to the doctor, the whole mindset is, I have this problem, the doctor's going to give me something that's going to fix me, and I don't have to do anything except make sure I take the pill or go in for my injections once every 3 or 6 months or whatever. And so it really is a recipe for taking any kind of personal responsibility out of it. And another point I'd like to make on supplements is that we're supplementing with nutritional elements. So we're supplementing with vitamins and minerals and things that absolutely across the board, whether you're me or Nation Winners or whether you're just some conventional oncologist, one of the things where we could find common ground would be everybody can admit that there are things that are legitimately real, like vitamin D deficiency, or like, uh, you know, a deficiency in vitamin K, or in magnesium, or in iron. These are things that we have identified, whether you're in a functional integrative setting or in a conventional setting, that there are known things that are part of just life and things that we should be consuming as part of our diet, that if we don't get enough of them, and that typically happens through just living the modern standard American diet and lifestyle, if we don't get enough of them, then they can certainly cause some problems. So supplements are a great way to fix some of those things. Diet is a great way to fix some of those things. But in the conventional model, one of the areas that I see that might be kind of out of balance with reality is there's no such thing as, for instance, a statin deficiency, or a beta blocker deficiency, or an antidepressant, serotonin, a selected serotonin reuptake inhibitor deficiency. Those things are not, things that are, by definition, they're not natural substances, so we can't be deficient in them. They're just things that modify our function. Of course, that comes with benefits, and that also comes with some, downsides that we call side effects. So using supplements and the lifestyle in combination with each other really, in most cases, alleviates the need for pharmaceuticals. Now, that doesn't mean that pharmaceuticals are never useful, but it does mean that, if you're familiar with the use of supplements and in the use of pharmaceuticals, and especially if you have, the appropriate experience there, then you can kind of, judge and determine when it's appropriate to use a pharmaceutical versus a supplement.
Well, and to speak to that, I love that we can consult with people using labs. We have direct to consumer labs, so we can test, assess, address. Thank you, Dr. Naisha Winters, for that. We can test, assess, address looking at their labs, and we can see where they're deficient, what they need. And
Right.
so there's a lot of discourse about vitamin D and whether you need vitamin D, and so that's one of those things that we test, assess, address, and we're not going to guess about.
Right.
We look at the labs to know exactly where your values are, what you are abundant in, and what you need
Yeah.
to support your system, which I love. So somebody could come to us, they could request a consultation. We could do light labs or in-depth labs, create a plan according to that, using supplementation and other recommendations to get them to an optimal place in their health. But we can also do that without doing labs. And we can give light supplement recommendations. And these are supplements that really everybody needs and that will help them, have optimal health. And let's talk about a few of those, like cod liver oil, magnesium, vitamin C, things of that nature, kind of the basics.
Yeah,
Go over that.
So. The way that I've been trained, my experience in integrative functional medicine at Veritas Medical, going through the metabolic approach to cancer training that I have, I've kind of come up with a core foundation of supplements that I think are, just generally speaking, pretty much great for everybody. Now, most of the time, I pretty much have a standard protocol that I put people on regarding just the basic supplements. But those supplements are essentially magnesium, cod liver oil. Those are my two favorite right there. So, I think that, there's a lot of evidence that people are magnesium deficient. And I think that that's one of the things out of several different factors that are responsible for, bone density issues, osteopenia, osteoporosis, joint and muscle aches and pains, headaches. You need magnesium for a ton of different processes in the body. You need magnesium to make, it's the most needed mineral when it comes to our enzyme system in the body. I've heard it quoted that around 40% of the enzymes in our body are reliant on magnesium to be in the proper level in our body, just so that those enzyme systems can function. And when we're talking about enzyme systems, a lot of people would be like, well, that's foreign. That's a foreign concept to me. We're talking about things like DNA repair. That's really important when it comes to things like fatigue, energy production, cancer, all of those things. So magnesium and cod liver oil are some of my favorite. Cod liver oil is beneficial for vitamins A, vitamins D. Also, the most bioavailable versions that our bodies like to use of the omega-3s. So those are your DHAs and your EPAs, as opposed to the plant-based version of omega-3s called ALA. So those two are definitely at the top, but I also really am a fan of vitamin C. I think vitamin C is a pretty important vitamin that a lot of people are deficient in. I also really like beef liver. Sometimes I'll use beef liver, depending on how many supplements a person's on, depending on what their labs look like. Sometimes I don't use that, but I really do like beef liver. It has, a lot of copper in it, as well as a lot of iron in it, but it actually has a lot more copper than it does iron. And so whenever you're talking about mineral balance in the body, you're talking about magnesium, copper, zinc, phosphorus, calcium. You can just keep kind of going down that list of different minerals that your bodies use. That is, incredibly important when it comes to your bone density and fluid shifting throughout the body and heart disease and brain function and all of these things. Let's see, what else is on that list?
D3K2 is a big one that we use.
D3 and K2. I mean, almost everybody that I've ever tested has been, probably even clinically low. But especially when you look at the the reference range on vitamin D, for instance, is 30 to 100. Probably the majority of the people that I've tested have been below 30. In my more than 2-decade career in medicine and looking at labs and whatnot. Having said that, not everybody's been below 30, but the functional range, really, especially if you look at the more conventional data, there's been a lot of data that's come out since COVID has been a thing in our world, and that basically shows that the majority of that body of evidence says you have to be at least 55 to reduce your risk of morbidity and mortality, meaning the severity of your disease is going to be less and your chances of death are going to be much less, significantly so, if you have a minimum vitamin D level of 55. And I can, the percentage point of people that are at 55 without supplementing, in my clinical experience, is, less than 10%, and probably significantly less than that. So vitamin D is important, and then you throw in the association between the fat soluble vitamins, so vitamin A and vitamin K in there as well. Certainly vitamin E as well. You're not going to be able to use vitamin D very effectively if you don't have K and you don't have A in along with it. So you can get all of those things through diet, but something that's interesting that I can quote kind of off the top of my head about magnesium is just in the last 80 to 100 years, the amount of magnesium that ultimately came from the soil and then got put into the plants that we consume, and also the meat that consumes the plants, and then we eat the meat, that magnesium level has fallen by over 80%.
Oh my.
Compared to what it was 80 to 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's just due to, the commercial agricultural methods that we use now, and how that has kind of corrupted the soil, which then doesn't have mineral content, and we just try to put it back in artificially. That doesn't work because it takes the living element out of it. It takes the microbes out of the soil, so you got the bacteria and the fungus and all of how that complex ecosystem works together in order to fix minerals and nutrients in the soil, and that's broken because we haven't used that method in a really long time, and so we don't have the same amount of minerals and nutrients in the soil that we once did, and so the foods that we eat don't have the same kind of mineral content. So, a lot of people say, oh, well, what if I just stick with a really, really good diet? Then that's kind of what I bring up, as I say, well, that's great. You should do that, but you can't count on your diet to give you, everything to keep you at optimal function, because the world has, gone through this change over the last, certainly over the last century. And so even the great quality foods that we do have don't necessarily have the same type of nutrition in them that they used to.
I want to talk about a few positive changes that have happened just with the kind of the core supplements that you recommend to most of our clients and that we take. For instance, the magnesium. When I got on magnesium, I noticed that my system felt a lot more balanced. I stopped being shaky. I stopped having headaches. With the cod liver oil, I did notice that when I'm faithful, and guys, consistency is the key. And there are times we fall off the bandwagon of consistency when it comes to our supplements. And I can always tell the difference. I can always feel it when I have moved away from, my good supplementation regimen. And when I started taking cod liver oil faithfully, I noticed my eyesight changed. I noticed my color spectrum was a lot more brighter and more vibrant. And I also noticed that when I would look from one thing to another, that the focal, that my eyes would focus much faster.
Right. Well, so I want to stop you. I want to stop you there and talk about that, because this is an important thing that I like to share with people, but I don't always have, the time to. But I can share now with everybody.
Sure.
And so the back of your eye, it's a very, very complex network of blood vessels and nerves and these specific, rods and cones, which is basically how we see. Those are the light receptors that focus on the black and white spectrum and the color spectrum, and then there's all kinds of different cool genetic variations and all of that. But ultimately, if you take that entire tissue back there and you think of it as a whole, what do we call it? It's called the retina. And cod liver oil, the main reason that I recommend cod liver oil is for retinol. And retinol is, another word for vitamin A. Most of the time, especially since we're talking about supplements, most of the time if you go out and you just typed in, vitamin A supplement. I heard Micah say something about vitamin A, so let's go and look at a vitamin A supplement online. If you actually get into the details of researching that vitamin A, most of the time what you're going to find is that it's not really vitamin A. It's something called retinol palmitate, or some other synthetic version of retinol that's been manufactured in a lab. And sometimes that may be bioidentical to something that actually naturally occurs in your body, but it's just synthesized in a lab. And then other times it might actually just be a synthetic version of vitamin A. I'm a big fan of only using natural substances, like cod liver oil is a great example of that, to get retinol, because that's, our bodies were designed in order to function on natural ingredients. And natural ingredients, one of the things that a lot of people struggle with as far as their understanding would be, okay, well, so everything's natural, because there's no such thing as an unnatural substance in the in the world, and so everything's synthesized right from natural things. And so you might hear someone say, particularly around things like stevia, oh well, it's a natural no calorie sweetener. And I would say it's important to understand the context, because when you start taking things out of the context of how they appear naturally, it actually changes the properties and how those things interact with your body. And I would concede that sometimes that happens for the benefit, but most of the time that's not the case. Most of the time there's an unintended consequence of altering nature. So things like retinol, great for the eyes, the back of the eye, the part that actually allows you to see, is actually named after what is needed to provide the nutrition to make that part of your body work. And that's a great clue as far, as to the benefit that you noticed, with the changes in your ability to focus on things and improvement in color vision and all that kind of stuff. Well, that makes perfect sense. Now that you know that the retina needs retinol to work. But that's something that, our probably great grandparents and older knew that as just part of common knowledge. Not so much today anymore.
Boy, that's the truth.
Another quick anecdote that I like to tell people is during the Lewis and Clark expedition, which was the expedition, back when America wasn't necessarily the America that we know now, and people did not populate the whole western part of the continent that we live on. And Lewis and Clark was commissioned to go and kind of tour and map out the uninhabited areas to the west of our country. At some point in that journey, one of the guys that was on that trip with Lewis and Clark actually went blind, had a complete blindness. And some of the Indian guides that they had hired to, kind of take them along and try to keep them safe and all that kind of thing, they actually had a natural remedy for that. So they went out and caught fish, took the livers out of the fish, took the eyeballs out of the fish. Both of those are super, super potent sources of retinol. And of course, you also have to superimpose upon that level of understanding the fact that we're talking about complete virgin nature, not the world that we live in today, but this is 100% natural the way God intended for it to be. And so they fed this guy a bunch of fish eyeballs and fish livers, and he regained his sight. But I can almost promise you that the Indians and the people that were behind that couldn't have told you at all what retinol was. But they did know that fish eyeballs and fish livers had something in it that fixed eyesight. So, that's a really great, kind of analogy into looking at how modern medicine works today. And we feel like we have to know everything. And there's this, evidence-based medicine that we have today, which is basically you have to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. And of course, that system is broken. But we go back to the ancient cultures, the native tribes, the indigenous peoples, and although they may not have had a great scientific understanding of it, what they did have was thousands of years of trial and error. And in my estimation, that works a lot better than the system that we have now, which has ultimately been greatly corrupted. But in any event, those are some of the important supplements, and so I think that anybody can take those supplements. Especially if they stick to the manufacturer's instructions on, on the dosing and timing of taking the supplements and whatnot. But I think where Worldview Wellness kind of takes things to the next level is through that test, assess, and address methodology. And really, I'm not guessing as far as what supplements you need. I'm looking at your labs. Typically, it's a pretty, exhaustive set of labs that I'm looking at, and I can really pinpoint, okay, this is a priority. You definitely need vitamin D. You definitely need this cod liver oil. And then, we get down into the nitty gritty, into the nuance of some of the, what I would say the non-essential supplements that are really paired based on that individual lab assessment.
Let's talk about some of the more complex supplements that you use for more complex reasons. For instance, we talked about the deep dive last week. When we do the deep dive and we get all these specialty kits that assess different parts of the terrain, the gut, the hormones, environmental pollutants and toxins, things of that nature, you can actually use supplementation to completely reroute hormones or to regulate certain dysfunctions in the body. And I know I can't do it justice, and I know that you'll explain it in a way, but this is kind of anecdotal for me.
Right.
When I got off of all of my hormones, and I went through menopause probably, about 9-10 years ago? 11 years ago, maybe? It was pretty hard.
Yeah.
The first year was pretty difficult. Hot flashes all the time, racing thoughts, lots of highs and lows emotionally. I really kind of felt like I was going a little nutty. And
I don't know what you're talking about.
poor you. And we started working on that.
Yeah.
We started eating organic food.
Well, those were also back in the days that I was,
The hormone
Dr. Hormone Man.
Oh man, yeah, he was. I was his lab experiment, and,
Right.
and I was using topical hormones and things of that nature.
Yeah.
But we decided to start all over, and so I got off of all of my hormones, and we started eating clean, organic, looking more towards whole foods. Instead of all of the stuff that we were eating. And this is when our understanding was very new, and we were really kind of embracing this cleaner way of being and seeing things kind of in God's way, not man's way. My hot flashes stopped. When you put me on selenium, which is great brain food.
Yeah.
And
thyroid food, too.
Yes, my racing thoughts slowed down. I was able to kind of get a hold of that part of it and the emotional part of it. And then when you put me on a thyroid supplement, instead of me taking medication, it really did change everything. I don't ever struggle with hot flashes.
Right.
I'm able to have a much more calmed down thought process. I'm able to reason better, less fogginess, et cetera, et cetera. And so are we recommending that you go out and get off of your thyroid medication? No. But if you were to come to Worldview Wellness and you wanted us to test, assess, address your thyroid and move you over to a supplement that's clean, that's not a medication, that is something that we can initiate and facilitate for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it worked wonders for me, but I want you to talk about kind of these deeper systems that we use supplements on and exactly how that works.
Well, that's really where, kind of going back to previous podcasts, talking about the deep dive and some of the specialty tests, there's quite a bit that I can discover from the blood labs and from the serum labs. But whenever we really start getting into the nitty gritty on pinpointing individual supplements, we're really, probably the majority of that comes from the deep dive tests. That would be your nutrition genome to assess your genetic makeup and your genotype, and how we can use the concept of epigenetics to optimize your expression of the genes that you have. We're talking about that. We're also talking about the GI map test, which does a really, really thorough gut evaluation, so that I know not just that, because it's very common for us to get a client, oh, hey, I've got bloating, or I've got indigestion, or I've been on this acid blocking medication for the last decade or more, or so they've got symptoms, but they don't really have any data, and now you could argue that symptoms is a type of data, and I would agree with that. But as far as we don't, that doesn't necessarily, like for any given symptom, for instance, like say indigestion. Well, that can be too little stomach acid, probably in the majority of cases. That could be too much stomach acid. That could be an inadequate contribution of your gallbladder and of bile in your diet. That could be exocrine pancreatic insufficiency, or you've got a pancreas that's not giving the pancreatic enzymes to contribute to your digestion. The GI map allows me to actually know that instead of just take guesses on what the problem might be. So when doctors and other medical providers are trying to diagnose a particular problem with any patient, they have what's called a differential diagnosis. And so someone comes in with indigestion. And so in the differential diagnosis, it's going to be, well, they've got too much stomach acid. That's definitely a conventional way to look at things. My first go-to is, well, they probably don't have enough stomach acid. And that's actually what the problem is. And that's probably true more often than not. But then it could also be the pancreas thing, or it could be the gallbladder thing, or it could be, a lack of motility in the gut, or how fast the gut moves, the stuff that you eat through it. There's all kinds of these other diagnoses that are potential, and that's called, when you put all of that together, that's called your differential diagnosis. So something like the GI map allows me to say, okay, I'm going to really severely cut back on my differential diagnosis, because I'm not just going by a set of, potentially vague symptoms, I'm actually looking at, okay, well, this is what this is what the function of the gut is doing. This is how much pancreatic enzymes I see in the stool. This is how much inflammatory proteins and markers are present in the stool. This is how much zonulin, which is a protein that talks about leaky gut. This is how much zonulin's in the stool. This is the secretory IgA level in the stool, which talks about how well your immune system is functioning in the stool. This is the amount of beta glucuronidase in the stool, which is an enzyme that lets me look at a part of the microbiome in the gut called the estrobolome, and is that contributing to estrogen imbalances and through the way that the gut is functioning. It also allows me to look at things like calprotectin, which is an inflammatory marker that is specific to the gut. So I'm able to look at all of those different things in the GI map, and then I can custom recommend a probiotic that is individualized to you based on your microbiome. What microbes do you have in your gut? Where's the imbalance? And here's a supplement that, in some cases I might need to use just a broad spectrum probiotic that's got a little bit of everything in it. In other cases, I have to use a very specific line of probiotics that may have just the bifidobacteria species in there, or in another instance, maybe just the lactobacillus species. But I can learn all of that through a GI map. And then the hormone equivalent to that would be what we run, which is called the Dutch Plus.
Which that's the next thing that I was coming to, because I have absolutely, and guys, I say this all the time, I'm dazzled when I see Micah put together a plan and talk about supplements and how they will facilitate changes of hormones that are being shunted down the wrong pathway or converted into something it shouldn't be converted into.
Yeah.
I want you to kind of talk about a sort of a case scenario of what could be going on in somebody's hormone system,
right,
and then how you would facilitate change with just supplementation.
Well, so a common finding in the Dutch labs would be, somebody would come to me with symptoms of, maybe history of, hormonal birth control, maybe in vitro fertilization or some type of infertility treatment, and then they may be coming to me with just like hormonal symptoms, or it could be anywhere from that to all the way up to breast cancer or ovarian cancer, which kind of like the ultimate manifestation of some of those imbalances. But a very common scenario that I run across is, okay, yeah, you've got a lot of hormone dysfunction, but it's probably stemming from another part of the Dutch test, which is the adrenal function. So you have just this crazy low adrenal output or crazy high adrenal output just because of, unresolved emotional conflicts, ongoing stressors, or just the hustle and bustle of living the American dream. We're all way too busy, and we don't have enough time for ourselves, and we don't take care of ourselves and all that. And that can certainly lead to adrenal fatigue, even if that's it, which it really never is. But so that trickles down because your adrenals basically take, all the way back to the beginning of that pathway. You have cholesterol, of course. That's a whole different can of worms.
I was going to say, that's a whole different episode.
Yeah, but, cholesterol is your, specifically the LDL cholesterol that we're told that we need to, reduce and reduce and reduce. That's really the primary building block which your adrenal hormones and your sex hormones are built on. So you take your cholesterol, and that gets, converted into this hormone called pregnenolone, and DHEA and DHEAS, and then those are kind of where all of your sex hormones start from. So, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, we're looking at all of those things. So, testosterone kind of comes first in a lot of the pathways, and then testosterone gets moved into estrogen via this pathway called the aromatase pathway. The gene that's responsible for that, CYP17. I think it's 17A1. But that's your aromatase pathway. And so, particularly guys and, most of the time it's going to be women, but sometimes guys, in order to prevent the conversion of testosterone into estrogens, you want to block that pathway. So almost everybody, certainly anyone that's had a friend or family member or colleague that's had breast cancer, probably familiar with the drug tamoxifen. Tamoxifen blocks the conversion of testosterone into estrogen. So that's used a lot in breast cancers and whatnot. It's also used sometimes in men with prostate cancers, and it's not just tamoxifen. There's other pharmaceuticals that you can use for that, but there's supplements as well. So there's things like myomin, and a handful of other things, apigenin and grapeseed extract, and there's just a ton of different supplements that you can use as natural aromatase inhibitors. And so you don't have to use the pharmaceuticals that come with the great side effects like cardiovascular disease and blood clots and pulmonary embolism and strokes and heart attacks and all of those, which are known side effects from taking drugs like tamoxifen. Not to mention hot flashes, since we were talking about that. But then furthermore, you're also looking at progesterone and the conversion of pregnenolone into progesterone. Typically when you've got, as women age particularly, when you're in your childbearing years, progesterone is typically higher than estrogen. And then, typically in the mid to late 30s, you have a kind of the switch, which means you become estrogen dominant. That's kind of part of that's just natural, but to the degree that it causes symptoms and becomes really this, symptomatic process, that part's not natural. But there's all kinds of different supplements that you can take to promote the body's natural production of progesterone. And then, one of the things that I really focus on in the Dutch Plus is the estrogen metabolites and the different estrogens and the balance of all of those things. And so we're talking about different genetic pathways and enzyme pathways that take, estrone, estradiol, and estriol, the three different types of estrogen hormones, into their different constituents and metabolites downstream. And so we're talking about the genetic enzyme pathway of CYP3A4 and CYP1B1, and these are just different enzyme pathways that are responsible for making the different levels and the different types of estrogen metabolites. And those are very important because the balance of those metabolites, even if the main estrogens are working the way that they ought to be, the estrogen metabolites might be a little bit off. So I might use a CYP1B1 inhibitor like salvestrol or resveratrol, or a CYP3A4 inhibitor, or there's just a lot of different things. And again, I'm also pairing that information with what I see in the nutrition genome information, because I'm looking at things like CYP1B1 also. That shows up in the nutrition genome as well. So I'll know if you've got a single nucleotide polymorphism on CYP1B1, and then I look at your Dutch Plus test and I see that, oh yeah, well that CYP1B1 pathway looks like it's got way too much of that metabolite compared to the other two, and it's out of balance. Well, then I know, okay, well now I have use for those specific supplements like salvestrol or grapeseed extract or resveratrol, in order to help kind of try to shut that pathway down and bring the rest of those metabolites into balance. So that can be very complicated. I'm also looking at, there's a piece of that study that is called the organic acids test. And there's a much more comprehensive version of the organic acids outside of what's available through the Dutch. But, there's a dozen or so different organic acids that are that show up on the Dutch test. And then that could lead to specific things. One of the things on that I could talk about off the top of my head is the VMA and HVA metabolite. That has to do with dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are some of your primary neurotransmitters in the brain. And so I can actually look at the metabolites of those neurotransmitters and see if there's an imbalance there. And so there's supplements like L-tyrosine melatonin, glutathione, SAMe, that may be able to help in certain situations, to try to help to bring some balance back to those neurotransmitters. But a lot of the hormone assessment comes back to the adrenal function. And I don't see that every time, but probably more often than not, I see that there's underlying adrenal dysfunction that needs to be addressed.
Well, so just really listening to this should tell our listeners that every plan is customized. We can go as deep as a client wants, or we can keep the plan light and shallow,
Yeah.
according to what their needs are. The journey is in your hands, and we want you to be the driver of that journey. But we test, assess, address, and we don't guess.
And the takeaway here, if nobody hears anything else, is that supplements are supplemental.
That's right.
To the lifestyle.
Now, I do feel like this is a great place to end the podcast on, but I do want you.
You should see the look on her face right now.
I'm kind of, yeah, I look like the mad scientist.
There's hand wringing.
Yes, rubbing their hands together, and I kind of have a crazy smile on my face because I love this subject. This subject, it makes people's heads pop off when you start talking about it. I want you to talk a little bit about cholesterol. I want you to talk a little bit about statins, and let's give everybody just a little bit to chew on. And I think our next podcast, we should really just go for it.
Earlier in the podcast, I was talking about how there's no such thing as a pharmaceutical deficiency, right? Mm-hmm. That's with statins was the first time that I was kind of clued in on that theory, right, or on that way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Can't remember the author, but a couple of good books, if anyone's interested on this topic, is the Statin Nation and the Statin Disaster. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, they're talking about the use of statins, and that there was not just this new widespread statin deficiency in our country since statins were so widely used. But ultimately, my take on statins goes back probably close to 10 years now. Mm-hmm. And it was after reading those books and being turned on to guys like Ivor Cummins and Dave Feldman. Those guys are not doctors. They're actually engineers. Mm-hmm. I kind of started uncovering the academic literature and research and comparing that to how we actually practiced medicine in our country and the recommendations for statin drugs, which essentially in our country is if you're over 60, regardless of what your cholesterol is, you're going to be recommended a statin drug. Mm-hmm. So they, ultimately over 60, it's almost a ubiquitous recommendation by the conventional medical establishment. And it's for heart disease, essentially, is the biggest reason to use statins, because people don't want to have heart attacks and they don't want to have plaques in their coronary arteries and things like strokes and all that. And if you really get down into the brass tacks on, the studies that have come out, and you start picking apart studies like the Jupiter study and, even the more recent studies that have come out since then, and you look at their data sets, then you start looking at absolute risk reduction, which is what we should be looking at. Those are not publicized in those studies. What you get is a relative risk reduction, in a very at least in my opinion, kind of a breezing over of the concept of all-cause mortality. And if I were king of the world, then every single scientific study or paper that came out about the promotion or use of a particular pharmaceutical, it would have to have a very advanced analysis of all-cause mortality. It would also have to have the relative risk reduction, as well as the absolute risk reduction, which is actually more important. Because what you actually find out with statin drugs is that there is, the absolute risk reduction for heart attacks and strokes and those types of things are not nearly as promising as what you would hear, when you think about the relative risk reduction. You might see relative risk reduction in terms of, oh, well, it's a 25% improvement in in outcomes, or maybe even a 48% improvement in outcomes. But then you get to the absolute risk reduction, and that number goes from 25 or 48 or whatever percent of an improvement to 0.4%. And so you're really taking a drug that has potentially major side effects, which a lot of people experience, especially when taken long term. And they're doing it for literally a less than 1% improvement. And then you look at all-cause mortality, and the all-cause mortality numbers, are really awful. So, in my estimation, when you're looking at those things, from an informed consent standpoint, I like to give all my people informed consent regarding the statin drugs, because if you look at what happens when you reduce your LDL cholesterol, or just cholesterol in general. Well, okay, so now, and not necessarily doing this with diet and lifestyle, but we're talking about pharmaceutical intervention. Well, okay, so you're not going to change your diet, and you're just going to take a statin drug. Okay, well, so now you've impaired your immune system, you've impaired your hepatic system, you've impaired your energy transport system, you've impaired your body's ability to have streamlined cognitive abilities, certainly in the long term. You've impaired your body's ability to have insulin sensitivity. All those things are known side effects of statin drugs, and we're basically treating them like they're safe as water, and everybody should be on them, especially if you're over 60. And then you also start looking at some of the other problems that we have in our country, especially in the over 60 population. There was a study that came out several years ago that said that the number one concern in the over 60 population was the development of dementia. And, my opinion is that statin drugs are a pretty significant part of that, as well as the nutritional guidelines in our country. So that's kind of like your sneak peek behind the statin conversation.
Well, so I want you to leave our listeners with one more thing, and then we'll dive into cholesterol and statin medications and when the lab values for that change. But I want you just to really quickly tell our listeners what the cholesterol lab value used to be.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And what it is now.
Well, back before, we're talking probably 50 years ago, before statins came out, the recommended total cholesterol levels were below 400. And so fast forward to 2023 now, although it's been like this for several years, those recommendations were cut in half, and they were kind of stair-step down, but they went from less than 400 to now less than 200. And at the same time, we've had kind of an explosion in autoimmune disease. Mm-hmm. We've had an explosion in cognitive decline and dementia as people get older. It's more the rule now than the exception, the way that it used to be. We've had an explosion in diabetes, and just endocrine dysfunction in general. And at the underlying, one of the underlying causes, the way that I look at things through my worldview, is that, if you look at what's the primary purpose of statin drugs, and a lot of drugs for that matter. There's not just statin drugs now. There's the, all kinds of other injectable drugs that don't work necessarily the exact same way as statin drugs now to reduce cholesterol. But the main molecule that's targeted there is the LDL cholesterol. And I want you to go back and think about something that I told you earlier about hormones. What are the hormones made out of? They're made out of cholesterol, mm-hmm. to a large degree LDL cholesterol. So how well do you think your hormone, or how well do you think hormones are going to function in a body where you're getting rid of, or you're greatly reducing, statin drugs are widely attributed to reduce LDL cholesterol by 50%. Of course, that varies depending on what statin drug you're actually taking. Crestor is probably a lot stronger than Lipitor, for instance. But 50% reduction in LDL. Well, how is that going to affect your thyroid. How is that going to affect your hormone balance? You're taking away the substance that is what those things are made out of. And so you're looking at widespread hormone imbalances, widespread endocrine deficiencies. In my opinion, statin drugs really haven't done the world a favor.
So what you're saying is there's been a health decline since the implementation of statins for pretty much everybody over 60.
Right.
And
well,
with
I
those,
think that if I were going to try to put this, and frame it in a nutshell, I'd say that, there's probably a lot of metrics. Now, this is not true in the last 3 years, and certainly not since COVID vaccines have come out.
Sure.
But, we're just going to take that and, conveniently tuck that behind the curtain here.
Okay.
And just talk about prior to COVID. There were a lot of metrics, particularly like life expectancy and those types of metrics where someone could come out and say, oh, well, yeah, so things are getting better. But I would make a really, really good argument for, life expectancy doesn't necessarily mean that we're dealing with quality of life.
That's right.
There's, one of the things that I love that Dr. Ben taught me while I was at Veritas was you've got a lifespan and you've got a health span. And doing the natural things that that I teach, that Dr. Ben teaches, that Naisha teaches, those things will do more to make your health span match your lifespan. And that's really what the goal is. It's to make, as much of your life quality as possible. What I would probably say, most people would probably just, gut agree with me on is that, we may have extended life to some degree, but we haven't improved the quality by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the quality's probably gone down. And that's not just medicine's fault. That's, society at large is responsible for that. I don't think medicine's really been too much of a help there. But, at the end of the day, that's really what we're after here, is we want to get that quality of life to be pretty much as close to your quantity of life as possible.
I really like that. I really appreciate that. I think that's a good place to end it.
I believe you're right.
I really appreciate you guys listening. This is Health Matters podcast, episode number 4.
It's in the bag.
It's in the bag. Be good to yourself because your health matters.
That's right.
We'll see you guys next time.